turn to Daniel chapter 2. We're going to look at this, I think it's one of the most important chapters in the Bible, okay, for many reasons, but let's look at Daniel chapter 2, and we're going to start in verse 31. Daniel chapter 2 in verse 31. And just to get you up to speed, where we're at in Daniel chapter 2 is Daniel has been taken captive to Babylon. The king had a dream, and he said, if you don't tell me what it is and what it means, I'm going to kill everybody. Daniel said, hold on, let me ask the Lord. He asked the Lord gives him the answer to the dream, and now he is going to tell Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the most powerful king in the world, the leader of the world. He's going to tell him what his dream was and what it meant in answer to prayer. So, important things here. Daniel 2, and if you'll look at verse 31. It says, Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, and stood before thee. The form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold. His breasts and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut down without hands, which smote the image upon its feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them in pieces. Then was the iron and the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream which we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. All right, so in this passage, remember Nebuchadnezzar said, I don't remember what the dream is, it's gone from me. But there had to be enough of it left in his subconscious that when Daniel told him what it was, he's like, that's it. You know how there's some things when you dream and you're like, and it's just kind of elusive, but you kind of know something? Well, Daniel cleared it up for him. And at that time, I'm sure the memory came back to him, so it would resonate him. And the reason he said, I want you to tell me what it is, because he wanted to know the authenticity of the interpretation. It was that important. And I think it is interesting that God reveals one of the most important prophecies in history. First, he gave it to a lost man. Now, go figure that. And there's some people that say, Calvinists, they say God can't speak to lost people. Lost people can't seek the Lord, but that is not true. There's all kinds of lost people in the Bible. Abimelech, Nebuchadnezzar, Pharaoh, that God spoke to. Okay, so that's obviously not true. All right, so this was the answer that the Lord gave Daniel to save his life and the life of those other wise men. But more than that, it's a message to God's people and to the entire world, because he gave it both to the lost world and to his people there. And it did more than tell the king about the future. It shows us a sweeping, prophetic panorama of the entire world and the events that are going to unfold. All right, so up to this point in biblical prophecy, there was no singular passage of Scripture, earlier biblical text, that provided a single, integrated vision of how the rest of the world's events would unfold and in what sequence they would unfold. All right, so this gives you, look, there was prophecies before Deuteronomy that talked about blessings and cursings and being kicked out of the land and being brought back into the land. There was prophecies in Judges and Samuel, and that and Kings that record the interactions and conflicts with the neighbors and prophecies concerning that, but it was on a local scale. There was the messianic prophecies and the coming kingdom in Daniel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Okay? And there was even specific prophecies about judgment on Assyria and judgment on Babylon and different things that would happen. But there was no single thing that unified it and gave you a timeline to see how it would unfold. So what are the new things that we have here? The new things we have here is we have a concrete timeline of how it's going to happen. We never had that before. So this is a really key point in biblical prophecy. This one image, this one prophecy is how all prophecy was unified, both here and as we look into the future in the book of Revelation. He said this is going to be sealed up until the time of the end. And what Revelation does, it unpacks the last part of this prophecy here. Okay? He said it's sealed up till the time of the end, but this is how much you have. And everything that has happened in the world from this time has run according to this prophecy. So I don't think it can be overstated about how important it is. And also how much it simplifies Bible prophecy. Okay? Do you have a picture of the image there? Okay? Do you want to understand Bible prophecy? That's all you need. That's all you need. Okay? That's how the rest of the world's events unfold from that time forward. And we'll make that simple. But that's how God sees it. And that's how He wants you to see it. And that's how He simplifies thousands of years into the future and what's going to happen. That's how you unify it, and that's how you keep it all together. That's how you know where we are in the timeline. Nothing could be more simple. Nothing. God is a genius. Okay? And that was what was given here. Okay, so it gave you the timeline. It gave you the linear progression of empires. Another thing it did is it gave you predictive prophecy about the Gentile powers. Up to this time, it mostly focused on the Jewish and maybe some punishment things that were happening. But this shows you when the Jews are out of control, what's going to happen with the Gentile powers and who's going to control what. And so we didn't have that before. And we have a schedule. You like a schedule, don't you? So this is a schedule of events. Here is the schedule of events for the end of the world. This is the itinerary, okay? And so we also are given here a theological framework to see how history culminates, okay? All right, so verse 31. We'll look at a little bit of the elements before we go into the interpretation. So he says, Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image, great image, whose brightness was excellent, and stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. Okay, so one thing we know right away is it was a single, magnificent image, and the visual impact is great, exceedingly bright, and terrible or fearful. And this is how God sees man, or the government of man. This is how God sees the collective. Remember Genesis chapter 6, he looked down and he said, look at man. Look what he's doing. All the thoughts of his thing are evil continually. It's repented me that I've made him, so I'm going to destroy them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Well, this is the same thing, because we always see ourselves as individuals, which we are. But God sees both His people, the church, as sometimes He sees you as an individual, but He also sees you as a collective unit. Humanity, or the church. But He also sees the lost world that way, and this is how God sees the collective lost world. It's terrible. And so this is man, but you see it's exceedingly bright. Look, man, remember, man was made in the image of God. And so man is very unique to the rest of creation. Man is capable, he's relational, intelligent, with communication. And when man goes rogue, it's terrible. It's terrible. I mean, just look back through history and all of the death that happened because men killed other men. Just in war, just some horrible, destructive things. But man, if he goes with the Lord, is also capable of so much more, taking on the image of the Lord Jesus Christ. So it's a blessing, but it was bright. The brightness was excellent, but they went rogue, and then it's exceedingly terrible. So God rejected, man becomes a scary and capable of much, much evil. It's unfathomable. I want you to see the unity of the statue, though it was composed of different metals. It's one cohesive figure. So that's humanity and what God thinks about the lost governments of the world successively throughout time. He sees it as one awful event. Okay? All right, and then he says this image head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron, a part of clay. So in this image there is 4 distinct metals. So if you'll show the next slide here. And by the way, I got these images, Brother Phil, thank you. He drew these and designed them. So you have the head of gold, you have the chest and the arms of brass, you have the belly and the thighs, or the chest and the arms of silver, the belly and the thighs of brass, and the feet, part iron, part clay, the legs of brass. Okay, so one thing we notice right away here is depreciation. Can you see that? Depreciation. Man is not getting better. He's getting worse. It starts with the head of gold. That's the finest and most valuable metal. Silver is less valuable, but it's still a precious metal. Then you have the belly and thighs of bronze. That's a step down in value. And then iron. Iron's pretty cheap. But there's a reduction in value, but at the same time, there's an increase in destructive capability. An increase in the ability. A brass hammer is much stronger than a gold hammer. Gold is very soft. Silver is soft, but it's not as soft as gold. Brass, you can do some pretty good things with brass, but nothing like iron. Iron can chop brass in half. And so you see the strength. And then you see that even the strength is lost due to division and substituting weaker materials where there's no chemical bond in the bottom. You can't bond clay and iron together. You cannot do it. One thing people do is they'll take clay and they'll do an iron oxide glaze on ceramic, but it still just busts just as easy. Okay, it might change the appearance, but it doesn't change the strength and the structure of that. So, and also this image, if you think about it, it has weak structural integrity because the metal doesn't gain strength, and where they're put together, they're not bonded together. So when you put 2 opposing metals together and you just try to melt them together and they're not mixed together, then it changes in temperature. It's just weak. It'll just topple over because it's not a cohesive unit. So the weak point is in the connections, and you can form it together, but it's not strong. Okay, and then you see verse 34, thou sawest till a stone was cut without hands, which smote the image upon its feet. that were of iron and clay and break them to pieces. Verse 35, then was the iron, clay, brass, silver, and gold broken to pieces together. They became like chaff of the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, and there was no place found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So, where does the stone hit it? It hits it at its feet, which is the most vulnerable part of the image, and it causes the entire image to crumble. The other thing you notice is the stone is not of human origin. It's cut without hands. It's not man-made, so it comes from above and destroys it. And you see the complete destruction and disappearance of all of the elements. They're carried away. And then the stone becomes a great mountain and fills the earth. So what do we know? That when God comes back, He is not going to reform human government. He's not going to build upon what we've done and improve it. He's going to get rid of all of it and start over with His own material and His own structure, and it's going to fill the whole earth. It's going to fill the whole earth. So, that's what's going on there. Verse 34, you saw till a stone was cut down, so you see that here. Okay, now here, let's get into the interpretation, verse 36. This is a dream, and we will tell thee the interpretation thereof before the king. Verse 37, thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath He given into thy hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. So right away, when you're looking at the timeline, we're past the head of gold. You know that right away. So what was the head of gold? It was Nebuchadnezzar. So that is the first kingdom that God deals with. And He said, you see this image, and this image is going from here down to the end of the world, and it starts with you. You are the head of gold. Now, for the historical context, this is 605 BC to 562 BC. A lot of events in the Bible happen under this time frame. Okay, so you start getting into the last part of the book of Kings, the last part of the book of Chronicles. You start getting into the post-exilic books. That happens under the head of gold. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar is credited with constructing one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Hanging Garden of Babylon. You can still go and see that in Iraq. Brother Holland's been there. You can ask him about that. He's been there. It's still a tourist attraction. They even had a concert over there not too long ago. So that was what he did. Jeremiah 51 called him a golden cup in the Lord's hand. He called him, I've given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant. And so he was a ruler over a vast territory, much of the Near East. And he was the first king to adopt the title King of Kings. He was called a King of Kings. And he ruled over and subjugated many kings and other nations. And his empire stretched from modern-day Iraq, Syria, Israel, parts of Turkey, and Iran. And that's how big the area was he ruled over. And he had control over this territory. Daniel says here in verse 38, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven lodged under it. That shows the completeness of his control. In Habakkuk, it says that he marches through the breadth of the earth to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. Habakkuk 1:6 talking about this. So, under Babylonian rule, you have the fall of Jerusalem, the exile of Judah, the captivity. You had Daniel and his companions go there. You have Daniel's rise to prominence, the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar's humbling, and Belshazzar's feast with the handwriting on the wall. All of that happened under the head of gold. And then, okay, so that is, that head of gold is Babylon. So now it says in verse 39, read it, Daniel 2:39, after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. So if you'll go to the other pictures, we already did the head of gold. Now go to the next one here, and that is silver, okay? And that's 239. It says it's another kingdom inferior to thee. So this is 539 to 331. So this is Media Persia. And what's unique about this, it's an alliance between the Medes and the Persians. It's an alliance, and it was led initially by King Cyrus, who unified the two groups under his rule around 550 BC. So the two arms show the combined power of the Medes and the Persians that together formed a single empire while they maintained their distinct identity. That was the unique part of that period of time. So Media Persia is also in Daniel chapter 8. We'll see that later. It's symbolized by a ram with two horns, one that's higher than the other, showing that Persia eventually dominates over the Medes. Okay, so what happened in the biblical time period under Media Persia? So you had the transition of power in Daniel 5 to 6. So the Medes and the Persians conquered Babylon, fulfilling specific prophecy. You have Daniel in the lion's den. You have Darius's reign. You have the edicts of Cyrus the Great. Remember you read Ezra, Nehemiah. So that happens under the silver. So we're already progressing on the timeline pretty far down the statue. You have the story of Esther at the end of it. That's Xerxes and the king, 127 provinces. And why is this important? These are world empires, unified world empires that happened at this time. And so you have Esther, and she gets the Jews delivered. Okay, and then here's what happens next. And it says there, and a third kingdom of brass, which will bear rule over all the earth. And so here you come down. This still happens. Go to the next picture here. This is where, look how far down we're getting already, and we haven't even gotten to the New Testament. Okay, so the time frame of the earth, prophetic timeline, is rapidly shrinking, even before you get to the New Testament. So, right here we have this, and this is the Greek Empire that was 331 to 146 BC. So this goes 331 to 146 years before Christ, and it's the belly and thighs of bronze. So that was Alexander the Great. And so, the Greek Empire. And Daniel 7 has a related prophecy with the bear, and Daniel 8 has a related prophecy there. So, what is this? What happened during this time? You have the Alexander the Great's conquest. And now, here's what's unique about this time frame. Remember, you have Malachi and then you have Matthew. And between that, you have 400 years. It's called the years of silence. Now, the biblical canon doesn't have those books. Okay, they're not included in the biblical canon. So when you read the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and you read that both in Matthew and Luke, okay? So you don't have to turn there, but Matthew and Luke. So when you get past Zechariah and you read those names until you get to Joseph, and then also the same in the book of Luke, those are the only biblical names of people we have that lived during that time period. And then you have I think it's John 10:22, where you have the feast of, I forget what it is, where they're going to Jerusalem and celebrating that feast, which is Purim. So that you have that event, and that was established during that time period. And then you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and you have the Essenes and those different people groups that you see there. Okay? That happened during this time period, but it's not in the biblical canon. And so in the original King James Bible that was printed, it included the Apocrypha. And where was the Apocrypha put? Because it wasn't put in the New Testament canon. Remember, because those are not, they're writings that happened during that time period, the 400 years of silence under Greek. And it put them in between the Testaments. Why did it do that? Because that's where it happened. And that's historical. Some of it is true. Some of it's not. It's not Bible, but you have the Maccabees in there. And that was, at least tradition, Jewish tradition, of what happened during that time period. Okay? And so, we don't have the context of what happened in the Bible under Alexander the Great. So, but what we do know by the New Testament, some things that happened. So, under Greek rule, a lot of the Jews, it's called the Hellenistic Jews. So they became Hellenized, or they started taking on Greek culture. We also see them dispersed. They're in Alexandria. They're dispersed across the land there, and you see group synagogues and Jewish cultures at different places that happened during that time period. Okay? So what happened? Judah changed hands between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids during that time period. You have Antioch Epiphanes that came in and desecrated the temple that led to the Maccabean revolt. And they established an independent Jewish state under the Hasmonean dynasty that ruled until the Roman take over. Okay, so you have the Pharisees and Sadducees, and we have a highlighted expectation for the Messiah to come during that time period. So you have Simon and Anna, and they're at the temple, and they're waiting for the Lord. Remember, you have the wise men that came from the east, and so there's this anticipation during that time period, and we don't know a lot about it, but by the time the Lord came, there were people looking for him. They were expecting him because of what happened there. And then you have, all right, to look at Daniel 2:40, and the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, as much as iron breaketh into pieces and subdueth all things, as iron that breaketh all these things shall it break into pieces and bruise. And so then now you have the legs. If you go to the next picture, you have the legs of iron, and then you have the feet, part of iron and part of brass. And so this is the Roman Empire that was in play when Jesus Christ came. And that was 146 BC to 476 AD. It goes all the way through the Middle Ages. And iron was the strongest metal known in the ancient world. And so it subdued all things, and it crushed them. And so that's what Rome did. So beginning in the Battle of Padina, they had victory over the Macedonians, and that's when they had a decisive battle, and they came in and they started taking over this area of the world. And so they started annexing and consuming and subduing all these kingdoms, because what the Roman legions were very disciplined. I mean, just look at Vinny, right? Okay? They took over, okay? And came in there and ruled everything. But what did they do? They also brought stability to the region. and they brought in a common language and a road system and a cultural exchange, and they call that Pax Romana, which is Roman peace, that was forced upon people, but it stabilized things, and it gave, so the Jews kind of flourished under this period. Whoa, is that me? Oh, I'm getting too close here. All right, so the Jews flourished under this period of time. Okay, so that state set the stage for the rapid decimation of news and ideas because they established these trade routes. I don't know what's happening here. If it happens again, we can go to this mic. Let's just do that now. Testing 1, 2. All right. All right, so then in this time period here, I don't know where I was at. Okay, so that set the stage for the rapid spread of Christianity after the Lord came. All right, so Daniel chapter 2 and verse 41, then he goes next, it says, "Whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest iron mixed with clay. And as the toes and the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou saw the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle with themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." So then you have the decline and the division of the Roman Empire during the 4th and 5th century. So after centuries of dominance, the Roman Empire did not fall to a single conqueror replacing it like all the others did. Do you see why that's important with this image? So Babylon, unified world empire. Then you have Media-Persia, unified world control. Then you have Greece, unified world control. Then you have Rome, unified world control. Well, what happens at the decline of the Roman Empire is it declines and it splits. So it's weakened into the eastern and western half. And so then the western half further fragmented into all these Germanic kingdoms that took over its territories. And so it's this patchwork of successive states that some of them are stable, some of them are strong, and they're partly strong and they're partly broken. And so throughout the Middle Ages, Europe is a collection of all these smaller kingdoms, but there's no unified control. And so, but what happened? There's all these alliances that are being formed, and you read where they're trying to make marriages with people to try to bring back that unified control. And Charlemagne tried it with the Holy Roman Empire. He wasn't able to do it. Napoleon tried to do it. You have the British Empire. You had Hitler. Okay? You have the EU. But even in our time, we see Brexit. I mean, Europe is not... Look what's happening there now. Everybody's fighting with everybody, and who? It's all divided. There's no unified control. So you have NATO, you have the EU, you have Russia, but it's just all divided up. And it's been that way ever since the Roman Empire fell. Okay, and so what does that give way to? The revived Roman Empire, which will happen under the Antichrist. So the Antichrist will take over. Revelation says that. And one king will rule 10 other kings with those toes. And that's when the stone comes and breaks it all to pieces. Okay? So it says in the days of those kings. What is that? That's the 10 toes. The 10 horns in the book of Revelation, You'll see that later. The 10 heads. Shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed? Okay? It'll break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms and stand forever. So they all fall, but God's kingdom endures. And you saw a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands and break into pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, verse 45, silver, gold. God hath made known that the kingdom which shall come to pass hereafter, the dream is certain and the interpretation thereof. Okay, so he said it's certain and the interpretation is certain. Now I want you to see where we're at. Look at the next picture. That's what is happening next. And look at the next picture. This is where you're at. That's where you're at. We're all the way through all the things of the image. Now, here's what I would say. He said, this is the interpretation, and it's sure. Everything has happened exactly according to Daniel's vision. Everything. Not one deviation. So what would make you think that the rest will not happen according to the vision? You know? Like, you can know where we are in the timeline, and this should not worry you, okay? But you just need to know where we're at. Look, thousands of years can seem like a long time because we don't live that long. You know, we're like mosquitoes or crickets. One time I bought a lot of crickets to feed some geckos, and I was like, oh, these crickets are expensive. I can find thousands of them on eBay. But then I didn't realize that cricket didn't pay enough attention in class, right? But crickets have like a 21-day lifespan, you know? And so the thousands of crickets didn't live long enough to feed the geckos for more than 21 days. All right, so we can't see very long, but God can see a long time. Okay? But we are like, oh, well, it's been so long and we don't know when it's going to happen. Look, it's going to happen soon because we're through the whole image all the way down to the bottom. Okay? And so that's what happens there. That's where we're at. And you ought to have confidence in the Bible and the Lord's prophecies. How did Daniel know that? How did he see and simplify everything that's going to happen? So, what do we have left? Well, we have left the stuff in Revelation. And the Revelation is the one where he unseals what happens with the 10 toes. He said, keep it sealed up till the time of the end. And so he goes through everything except for that last part. And the book of Revelation unfolds it, you know? And you know what I think is just absolutely crazy as you think about the timeline and some of the things that are happening in the world. Remember when you get into the Revelation prophecy and you have the horse death, the famine horse, and all those people die? And then in the other one you have the star fall from heaven and 1/3 part of people die. Remember that? So what do you have during that time period? You have a reduction of the earth's population. Okay? The earth population is reduced. Now, ever since Adam and Eve, or let me say ever since Noah stepped off the ark, the earth's population has always been increasing. Always been increasing until now. And ever since the 60s and 70s with the birth control and abortion and all of that stuff, you know what's happened for the first time is the world's population is peaking right now. And then it's going to fall off a cliff. And you already see it in Europe. You know, there's all kinds of ghost towns around Greece, Italy, Eastern Europe, Okay, you're starting to see it in the U.S. and Canada. You'll start seeing it really bad. There's only a few places on earth that has a positive birth rate. Just a few places in Africa. Everywhere else, Japan's losing probably, they're starting off with 1 million people a year. South Korea, I mean, within the next few years, the earth population is going to fall off a cliff. Now, I don't know if that has anything to do with the prophecies in Revelation, but I think it's absolutely insane that where we're at the time period and what happens during the tribulation and reduction in earth population, and that's what's about to start happening right now. So we're at a very unique time period, and it's an exciting place to live, right? It's an exciting time to live and serve the Lord. And you know what? We just need to see as many people get saved as possible. But don't worry, okay? The book of Revelation is supposed to give you a blessing. He said, blessed is he that readeth and that understandeth. And all this timeline of prophecy is supposed to give you peace and rest. The Lord is in control. I know where everything is heading. It is not supposed to turn you into a prepper. There's no preppers in the New Testament, okay? So don't read it and watch YouTube and get scared and go get a school bus and bury it in your backyard and put a bunch of peanut butter in it, okay? Just serve the Lord and be busy about the work of God. And, it's all come crashing down eventually anyway, so don't worry about it too much. Just serve the Lord. Worry about what he told you to worry about. The craziest thing that I've ever seen is anybody that gets into prophecy, they're usually more interested in the Antichrist than Jesus Christ. And they're more interested in protecting themselves against what is happening instead of doing what God said. How do I position myself how do I short the earth, How do I invest in the short side of the earth when it happens? I want to short the earth so my investments can go up while everyone else is going down. But you know what the Lord said? Hey, I'm coming back. Everything is going to be destroyed, so get busy. And when I come back, I want to see you doing my work. But nobody reads these things and said, man, there's not a lot of time left. We should do what Jesus said. And that's what I think it should do. And I just, my dad that's one of the blessings I got from my dad. He was anti-prepper, When everyone else was prepping for Y2K, he said, well, what? He's like, I don't want to store up all this food because even if it did happen, he said, what am I going to do? Shoot my neighbors to keep my peanut butter? He said, no. It's easier just to suffer with everybody else, And so I thought that was a blessing. All right. You see why it's one of the most important chapters in the Bible? And it simplifies everything. You understand in Daniel chapter 2, and you understand the whole prophetic timeline and where everything fits in one little picture. All right, let's stand and we'll be dismissed in prayer. Lord, thank you, Father, for the Bible. Thank you for Daniel chapter 2 and just amazing prophecy that helps us to understand where we're at, how everything's going to end. And I thank you that we're all the way through the whole thing, down to the feet and the toes. So, Lord, and we can look back through the whole image and just see God knows exactly what he's talking about. He told us what would happen in detail all the way through. We can trust him. And if we can trust him from the head down to the toes, we can surely trust him all the way out through the toenails. In Jesus' name, amen.